Sometimes the greatest miracle is not finding a fortune, but discovering that someone who has everything is searching for the one thing money can never buy. The rain had finally stopped over the quiet Ohio countryside, leaving the gravel road glistening beneath the fading light of early evening. Ethan Walker eased his aging pickup truck into the driveway, the engine rumbling softly before settling into silence. It had been another 12-hour day repairing fences, replacing broken porch steps, and patching leaking roofs across neighboring farms. His hands ached. His shoulders felt heavy. Yet none of that mattered because every mile home meant another evening with his little daughter, another simple dinner, another chance to remind himself that love could survive even after life had taken so much away. He reached for his worn lunchbox, stepped onto the damp porch, and immediately noticed something strange. The porch light was already on. He frowned. He always turned it off before leaving. For a long moment, he simply stood there, listening. The distant chorus of crickets blended with dripping rainwater sliding from the roof. Somewhere beyond the trees, a dog barked once before everything became quiet again. Ethan slowly pushed open the front door. A warm scent drifted toward him. Fresh baked bread, cinnamon, lemon furniture polish. The familiar little farmhouse somehow felt different. Brighter, lighter, softer. He quietly placed his toolbox beside the entrance without making a sound. Soft music floated through the hallway, gentle enough to blend with the evening breeze slipping through the open kitchen window. His heartbeat slowed instead of racing. There was no fear inside him, only confusion. Then he turned the corner toward the kitchen and stopped completely. A woman wearing a simple pale blue apron knelt beside the wooden floor with a cleaning cloth in her hands. Her expensive tailored jacket rested neatly over the back of a dining chair. Designer heels had been replaced with comfortable socks. A loose strand of blonde hair had escaped from her tidy ponytail as she carefully polished the old hardwood floor that Ethan had installed years earlier with his late wife. She looked up at the sound of his footsteps. Their eyes met. The woman smiled with surprising warmth, as though she had been expecting him all along. Ethan recognized her instantly. Charlotte Bennett, the billionaire chief executive officer whose face appeared on magazine covers, financial news programs, and charity galas across the country. Yet there she was, quietly cleaning the worn farmhouse kitchen as though it were the most natural place in the world. Ethan blinked once. Certain exhaustion had begun playing tricks on his mind. He glanced toward the doorway, then back at her again. Nothing changed. She remained there, gently holding the cloth in one hand, calm blue eyes filled with kindness instead of pride. She slowly stood, brushed invisible dust from her apron, and offered the same gentle smile. "Welcome home, Ethan," she said softly. "I hope you do not mind. Your daughter told me you never have enough time to take care of yourself, so I thought I could help." Ethan searched for words, but none arrived. Outside, the last rays of sunlight broke through retreating storm clouds, filling the little farmhouse with warm golden light. Inside that humble kitchen, surrounded by weathered cabinets, family photographs, and years of quiet memories, the distance between extraordinary wealth and ordinary goodness suddenly became smaller than a single heartbeat. Ethan remained motionless for several long seconds, searching Charlotte Bennett's face for any sign that this extraordinary moment was some elaborate misunderstanding. Instead, he found only sincerity. The billionaire quietly folded the cleaning cloth, placed it beside the sink, and glanced toward the hallway, where gentle laughter drifted from the living room. His 8-year-old daughter, Lily, appeared carrying a basket of freshly folded towels that looked far too large for her small arms. She smiled brightly the moment she saw her father standing in the doorway. "Daddy, you are home," she said happily before setting the basket onto the old wooden table. "Miss Charlotte helped me finish everything before dinner." Ethan looked from his daughter to Charlotte and back again. His voice remained calm, though filled with honest confusion. "Lily, when did Miss Charlotte arrive?" The little girl tucked a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear. "Right after school. She asked if I wanted help making the house look nice before you came home." Charlotte lowered her eyes for a moment, almost embarrassed. "I hope I did not overstep. I only wanted to help." Ethan slowly removed his worn work gloves and placed them carefully beside the toolbox. Every instinct told him this scene belonged in someone else's life, not his. He had spent years repairing broken porches, replacing fences after storms, and helping neighbors who could never fully repay him. Fame had never crossed his mind. Wealth had never interested him. Peace had always been enough. The little farmhouse reflected that philosophy in every corner. Family photographs rested upon handcrafted shelves. A patchwork quilt covered the aging sofa. The kitchen cabinets showed years of careful use rather than neglect. Nothing inside the house was expensive, yet everything carried a memory. Charlotte quietly admired those details while Ethan washed the dust from his hands beneath warm running water. She noticed how gently he handled every ordinary object, as though gratitude had become part of his daily routine. It was a quality she had not encountered inside boardrooms lined with polished marble and million-dollar contracts. Those places measured success by numbers. This home measured success by kindness. Lily tugged lightly on Charlotte's sleeve. "Can you show Daddy the cookies?" Charlotte smiled and nodded. Together, they carried a baking tray toward the table. The cookies were imperfectly shaped, slightly different sizes, and sprinkled with cinnamon sugar. Ethan looked at them with genuine surprise. "You bake these?" Charlotte laughed softly. Lily was the real teacher. "I only followed instructions." Lily giggled proudly. She almost burned the first batch. Charlotte covered her face for a second, laughing at herself without embarrassment. Ethan felt the tightness inside his chest begin to disappear. For the first time since recognizing one of the most successful women in America standing inside his kitchen, he stopped seeing the public figure the world admired. Instead, he saw someone trying very hard to belong somewhere that expected nothing from her except honesty. Outside, evening settled gently across the quiet fields as the last golden light faded beyond the old maple trees. Inside the farmhouse, 3 simple plates rested upon the dinner table, while fresh bread cooled beside a pot of homemade soup. Nothing about the meal belonged in a luxury magazine, yet everything about it carried a quiet warmth that money alone could never purchase. Charlotte looked around the little kitchen once more, then met Ethan's eyes with a peaceful smile. Without another word, he pulled out a chair for her, silently acknowledging that sometimes the most unexpected guests arrived, carrying exactly the kind of hope a home had been missing for far longer than anyone realized. The evening unfolded with an unfamiliar peace that neither Ethan nor Charlotte seemed eager to disturb. The little farmhouse, usually wrapped in quiet routine, now carried the comforting sounds of shared conversation, clinking dishes, and Lily's cheerful laughter drifting through every room. Ethan carried the empty soup bowls to the sink while Charlotte instinctively reached for a towel to dry them. He glanced toward her with a gentle smile. "You really do not have to do this." Charlotte returned the smile without slowing her hands. "Perhaps I do." Ethan looked puzzled, but before he could ask another question, Lily skipped into the kitchen, holding a small cardboard box decorated with faded crayons and colorful stickers. "Daddy, can I show Miss Charlotte Mom's memory box?" Ethan's expression softened immediately. He nodded quietly. Lily placed the box on the dining table and carefully lifted the lid. Inside rested simple treasures that would have meant very little to strangers. A worn recipe card covered in flower stains. A pressed wildflower sealed inside clear paper. A tiny pair of knitted baby socks. Several handwritten birthday notes. A family photograph taken beside the old maple tree before illness had changed everything. Charlotte picked up the photograph with remarkable care, almost afraid to bend its edges. She studied the smiling faces in silence before looking toward Ethan. She had kind eyes. Ethan nodded slowly. She believed every house could become a home if people filled it with enough patience. Charlotte gently returned the photograph exactly where she had found it. For a brief moment, no one spoke. The only sounds came from the ticking wall clock and the soft evening breeze passing through the open kitchen window. Finally, Charlotte broke the silence. "I spend most evenings inside conference rooms or private aircraft. There are always people around me. Yet I cannot remember the last time a room felt this peaceful." Ethan leaned lightly against the kitchen counter. Peace does not usually arrive because life becomes easier. Sometimes it arrives because people stop pretending. Charlotte lowered her eyes, quietly considering his words. She had spent years presenting confidence to shareholders, investors, journalists, and competitors. Every smile had been measured, every decision analyzed, every public appearance carefully planned. Yet inside this modest farmhouse, wearing an apron instead of a tailored jacket, she felt lighter than she had in years. Lily interrupted the thoughtful silence with a bright grin. "Miss Charlotte, tomorrow Daddy has to fix Mrs. Wilson's porch. Can you come with us?" Ethan immediately shook his head. "Lily, Miss Charlotte has important responsibilities." Before he finished speaking, Charlotte answered with unexpected certainty. "If Ethan does not mind, I would like that very much." Ethan looked at her in surprise. Repairing a porch is not exactly executive work. Charlotte laughed softly. "Perhaps that is exactly why I should try it." Lily clapped her hands with excitement before running toward the hallway to prepare her backpack for the next morning. Ethan watched his daughter disappear, then turned back toward Charlotte. The warm kitchen light reflected gently across the old wooden table between them. Outside, the stars slowly appeared above the quiet Ohio countryside while crickets filled the fields with peaceful rhythm. Inside, neither wealth nor hardship seemed to matter anymore. For the first time in many years, Charlotte felt she was not being admired for success or judged for status. She was simply another person sharing dinner inside a home where kindness was offered freely, dignity lived in every ordinary moment, and the richest thing anyone possessed was the quiet privilege of belonging. The following morning arrived wrapped in soft golden light that stretched across the quiet Ohio countryside, painting the old farmhouse in warm shades of amber and cream. Ethan was already outside tightening the straps on his weather toolbox when Charlotte stepped onto the porch carrying 3 steaming travel mugs filled with fresh coffee and warm cocoa for Lily. Gone was the perfectly tailored executive image the nation recognized. Instead, she wore comfortable blue jeans, a light cotton shirt beneath a canvas jacket, sturdy work boots borrowed from a neighbor, and a simple ponytail that moved gently in the morning breeze. Lily smiled the moment she saw her. "You really came." Charlotte laughed softly. "I promised, did I not?" Ethan accepted the coffee with quiet appreciation before opening the passenger door of his aging pickup truck. It is about 20 miles to Mrs. Wilson's farm. The ride is not exactly comfortable. Charlotte climbed inside with an amused smile. After years of sitting inside luxury sedans, perhaps uncomfortable is exactly what I need. The truck rolled slowly along winding country roads bordered by white fences, grazing horses, and fields sparkling with morning dew. Charlotte watched farmers wave as Ethan passed, and he returned every greeting with the same warm smile. "Do you know everyone out here?" she asked. Ethan shrugged gently. "Not everyone, just enough people to know who might need help." She quietly absorbed those words. In her world, people measured influence through market value and quarterly earnings. Here, respect seemed to be earned one small act of kindness at a time. They arrived at Mrs. Wilson's farmhouse where an aging wooden porch leaned noticeably after years of harsh winters and heavy storms. The elderly widow greeted Ethan with grateful eyes before noticing Charlotte lifting lumber from the truck. "You brought help today," Mrs. Wilson said. With a smile, Ethan nodded. Charlotte wanted to learn. The older woman simply welcomed her without another question. For the next several hours, Charlotte held measuring tape, passed tools, carried fresh boards, and listened carefully whenever Ethan explained each step. She made mistakes. She measured one board incorrectly. She nearly dropped a box of nails. Lily laughed good-naturedly, while Ethan patiently showed her the correct way without a trace of frustration. Charlotte found herself laughing as well, surprised that failure could feel so freeing when nobody expected perfection. Around lunchtime, Mrs. Wilson served homemade chicken soup, fresh biscuits, and sweet iced tea beneath the shade of a large oak tree. The conversation drifted naturally from gardening to weather, from school memories to community festivals. Nobody asked Charlotte about stock prices, business mergers, or magazine interviews. Nobody treated her like a celebrity. They simply welcomed another guest at the table. As the afternoon sun settled lower across the fields, Ethan secured the final porch railing and stepped back to inspect the finished work. Mrs. Wilson reached for her purse, but Ethan gently raised one hand. "You already paid me with your peach pie last month. Today is simply neighbors helping neighbors." The elderly woman smiled with tears glistening in her eyes. Charlotte watched the exchange in complete silence. She had witnessed billion-dollar negotiations where every favor demanded something in return. Yet this simple carpenter quietly refused payment without hesitation. During the drive home, she gazed through the truck window at endless rolling farmland glowing beneath the evening sky. The silence between them felt peaceful instead of awkward. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan, I spent years believing success meant building an empire. Today, an old porch taught me that sometimes the strongest foundation anyone can build is the one beneath another person's feet." Ethan smiled gently, without taking his eyes from the quiet country road ahead. And somewhere deep inside Charlotte, a life she had never imagined slowly began to feel more valuable than the one she had always believed she wanted. The rhythm of country life settled gently around Charlotte during the days that followed, and with each sunrise the distance between the woman the world admired and the woman she truly wanted to become quietly disappeared. Every morning began with the sound of Lily laughing somewhere inside the farmhouse, the rich aroma of fresh coffee drifting through the kitchen, and Ethan already outside, checking his truck before another day of honest work. Charlotte found herself looking forward to those ordinary moments more than any private flight or executive meeting she had attended during the past decade. She no longer measured the day by schedules or financial reports. She measured it by conversations around the breakfast table, by the satisfaction of folding freshly washed laundry, and by the peaceful silence that settled over the farmhouse each evening. Yet hundreds of miles away, inside the glass headquarters of Bennett Global Holdings in downtown Chicago, a very different atmosphere had begun to unfold. The executive boardroom buzzed with growing concern as directors exchanged anxious glances around the polished conference table. Charlotte had missed multiple strategy meetings. Important documents remained unsigned. Investors were requesting explanations. News organizations had begun reporting that the billionaire chief executive officer had unexpectedly disappeared from public view. Her executive assistant answered the same question dozens of times each day without offering a real answer, because she simply did not have one. Rumors spread quickly across financial media. Some believed Charlotte was negotiating a secret acquisition. Others claimed she was recovering from exhaustion. A few suggested she was preparing to resign. No one imagined she was spending her mornings helping a little girl pack school lunches before sweeping the front porch of a modest farmhouse in rural Ohio. Back at Ethan's home, none of those headlines existed. Lily proudly showed Charlotte how to water the small vegetable garden planted beside the old fence. Ethan repaired loose hinges on the barn while humming a quiet tune his late wife used to sing. Charlotte knelt beside rows of tomatoes and green beans with soil covering her borrowed gardening gloves, smiling each time Lily celebrated another tiny cucumber growing beneath the leaves. She caught herself laughing more often than she had in years. The laughter felt unfamiliar at first, then wonderfully natural. Late that afternoon, Ethan noticed Charlotte sitting alone on the front porch, watching the sunset spread warm shades of orange across the endless fields. He carried 2 glasses of homemade lemonade and quietly offered one to her before taking a seat beside her. Neither spoke immediately. The peaceful silence carried no pressure. Finally, Charlotte smiled faintly. "Do you know what surprises me the most?" Ethan looked toward the horizon. "Tell me." She held the cool glass with both hands. "Nobody here has asked what I own. They only ask whether I would like another helping of dinner or whether I slept well." Ethan nodded gently. People who have enough kindness usually stop counting everything else. Charlotte lowered her eyes, deeply moved by the simplicity of his words. She realized she had spent years surrounded by people impressed with her success, but very few who genuinely cared whether she was happy. As evening settled over the quiet countryside, porch lights slowly appeared across neighboring farms while crickets filled the cool summer air with gentle music. Inside the farmhouse, Lily carefully set 3 places at the dinner table, smiling as though Charlotte had always belonged there. Far beyond those peaceful fields, an entire corporate empire searched desperately for the woman who seemed to have vanished. Meanwhile, the woman they sought had quietly discovered something infinitely more valuable than another business victory. She had found a home where respect was freely given, where dignity required no title, and where the richest moments arrived wrapped in the simplest acts of everyday kindness. The peaceful rhythm of the farmhouse continued until one bright autumn morning when the distant sound of approaching engines drifted across the open fields. Ethan looked up from repairing a section of split fence as several polished blacksport utility vehicles slowly turned onto the long gravel driveway, their glossy paint reflecting the clear blue sky in sharp contrast to the weathered barns and golden cornfields surrounding the property. Lily paused in the vegetable garden, brushing dirt from her small hands before glancing curiously toward Charlotte. Charlotte stood quietly on the front porch, her expression calm, as though she had known this moment would eventually arrive. The vehicles came to a gentle stop, and several professionally dressed executives stepped out, followed by an older gentleman carrying a leather portfolio. His silver hair was neatly combed, and years of responsibility were visible in the lines across his thoughtful face. He walked toward the porch with measured steps before stopping respectfully several feet away. "Miss Bennet," he said gently, "we have been searching everywhere for you." Ethan remained silent, setting his hammer carefully inside the toolbox rather than interrupting. The older executive looked around the modest property with visible disbelief. Fresh laundry swayed gently on a clothesline. A small bicycle rested near the porch steps. Homemade bird feeders hung beneath the old maple tree. Finally, his eyes settled on Charlotte's simple work clothes and gardening gloves. For a brief moment, he seemed unable to reconcile the woman before him with the leader who managed one of the largest companies in the country. "The board is deeply concerned," he continued. "Investors are demanding answers. Major decisions cannot wait much longer." Charlotte listened patiently before offering a small, grateful smile. "Thank you for coming all this way, Daniel." Ethan quietly invited everyone onto the porch. "You have traveled a long distance. At least have some coffee before discussing business." The executives exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unfamiliar with such simple hospitality, but accepted the invitation. Within minutes, they found themselves seated around an old wooden table, while Lily proudly carried homemade cookies onto the porch. Daniel looked toward Ethan with genuine curiosity. "You understand who she is, do you not?" Ethan smiled softly. "I know exactly who. Charlotte is. I simply choose to treat her the same way I would treat any guest who walks through my front door." The answer settled over the group in complete silence. Charlotte lowered her eyes for a moment, deeply moved by words spoken without the slightest attempt to impress anyone. Daniel finally turned back toward her. "Miss Bennet, everyone expects you to return immediately." Charlotte slowly looked across the fields where morning sunlight shimmered over rows of harvested crops before speaking with quiet certainty. "For years I believed every important decision had to be made inside a boardroom. Then I came here and learned that some of the most important decisions happen around a family dinner table, while repairing a neighbor's porch, or while helping a little girl water tomatoes after school." No one interrupted. Even the autumn breeze seemed to pause around the old farmhouse. Charlotte gently folded her gardening gloves in her hands. "I will return," she said calmly, "because responsibility still matters. But I will never again confuse success with significance. This home reminded me that people are always more valuable than positions, and dignity will always outlast wealth." Daniel slowly nodded, understanding that the woman before him had not disappeared at all. She had simply found the part of herself that had been missing for far longer than anyone inside the corporate world had ever realized. After the executives quietly departed, the farmhouse seemed to breathe again. The silence that returned was softer than before, carrying the comforting sounds of rustling maple leaves, distant birds, and the gentle creak of the old porch swing moving with the afternoon breeze. Ethan gathered the empty coffee cups from the table, while Lily chased colorful leaves across the front yard, laughing each time the wind changed their direction. Charlotte remained standing near the porch railing, watching the long gravel driveway disappear beyond the fields until the last black vehicle vanished from sight. For several moments, neither she nor Ethan spoke. Words suddenly felt too small for everything that had quietly changed between them. Ethan finally placed the last cup inside the sink before stepping back onto the porch. He rested his hands lightly against the wooden railing beside Charlotte and looked across the endless farmland glowing beneath the autumn sun. "You did not have to explain yourself to anyone," he said gently. Charlotte smiled without looking away from the horizon. "Perhaps I needed to explain it to myself." Her voice carried neither regret nor pride, only honesty. The breeze lifted a loose strand of her blonde hair as she continued. "While I was 10 years old, my parents were almost never home. Our house was beautiful, but it never felt alive. Every birthday arrived with expensive gifts and carefully planned celebrations. Yet I always wished someone would simply sit beside me at dinner without checking a phone or rushing to another meeting." Ethan listened quietly, never interrupting. Charlotte took a slow breath before continuing. "As I grew older, I convinced myself that if I built the biggest company, solved every problem, and never showed weakness, I would finally earn the kind of happiness I had been searching for. Instead, every promotion made my office larger and my evenings quieter." Ethan lowered his eyes thoughtfully. "I understand quiet in a different way." Charlotte turned toward him. He looked out across the fields before speaking again. "When my wife passed away, this house became painfully silent. Lily was only 3 years old. Every room reminded me of someone who was no longer there. For a long time, I believed working harder would somehow fill the empty spaces. It never did. Only time, faith, and my daughter slowly taught me how to keep living without forgetting." Charlotte felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness alone, but from finally being understood without judgment. She reached gently into her jacket pocket and removed a small silver keychain shaped like a tiny house. "My father gave me this before he died," she said softly. "He told me never to confuse owning houses with having a home. I carried it for years without truly understanding what he meant." Ethan studied the little keepsake before smiling warmly. "Maybe some lessons arrive exactly when we are finally ready to hear them." At that moment, Lily ran toward the porch holding 2 pumpkins she had picked from the garden. "Look what I found," she called happily. "Can we carve them together tonight?" Ethan looked toward Charlotte. Before he could answer, she knelt beside Lily with a bright smile that reached her eyes. "I would love that." Lily wrapped her arms around Charlotte without hesitation, and Charlotte embraced her with quiet gratitude. Ethan watched the simple moment unfold beneath the golden evening sky and realized that neither wealth nor loss had brought them together. It had been kindness, patience, and the courage to remain gentle in a world that often rewarded the opposite. In that peaceful farmhouse, surrounded by fields ready for harvest, 3 hearts carried different stories, yet each had quietly discovered the same enduring truth. A family is not measured by the life people expect you to live. It is measured by the love that chooses to stay when the day is over and the world grows still. 3 days later, Charlotte returned to Chicago before sunrise, carrying only a small overnight bag and the quiet confidence she had rediscovered in the Ohio countryside. The towering glass headquarters of Bennett Global Holdings looked exactly as she had left it. Polished marble floors reflected brilliant morning light. Employees hurried through the lobby with tablets and coffee cups in hand, and television screens displayed the latest financial headlines. Everything appeared unchanged, yet Charlotte immediately understood that she was the one who had changed. As the elevator carried her toward the executive floor, she glanced at the small silver house-shaped keychain resting in her hand before slipping it into her pocket with a gentle smile. When the board meeting began, every seat around the enormous conference table was occupied. Investors, senior executives, legal advisors and department directors watched in complete silence as Charlotte entered the room, wearing her familiar Navy business suit. Daniel stood and welcomed her back before carefully sitting down again. The atmosphere was respectful but tense. Everyone expected explanations, strategic plans, and reassuring forecasts. Charlotte quietly placed a simple framed photograph onto the conference table before taking her seat. It was not a financial report or a presentation. It was a photograph of Ethan, Lily, and a little farmhouse surrounded by golden autumn fields. Curious expressions spread across the room. Charlotte looked around at every face before speaking with calm certainty. During the past several days, many people have asked where I disappeared. The truth is that I did not disappear at all. I simply stepped into a life that reminded me what success is supposed to protect. No one interrupted. Even the clicking keyboards stopped. Charlotte continued with quiet confidence. For years, I believed leadership meant always moving faster, earning more, and carrying greater responsibility than everyone around me. I now understand that leadership also means remembering why those responsibilities exist in the first place. A company can create wealth, but only people create meaning. Several board members exchanged thoughtful glances. Charlotte looked toward Daniel before continuing. I met a father who never measured his value by his income. I met a little girl who believed sharing homemade cookies was more important than impressing strangers. Inside their home, I discovered something every balance sheet had failed to teach me. Dignity cannot be purchased. Kindness cannot be negotiated. Respect grows through ordinary choices made every single day. The room became completely still. One senior executive slowly removed his reading glasses while another quietly folded his hands together. Charlotte allowed the silence to remain for several moments before speaking again. Beginning today, Bennett Global Holdings will expand every employee family support program, increase paid volunteer opportunities in local communities, and establish a foundation dedicated to helping working single parents build stable homes for their children. Financial growth will always matter, but it will never again come before human dignity. Daniel smiled with unmistakable pride. Around the room, heads slowly nodded in agreement. The decision was unanimous before a formal vote was even requested. Later that afternoon, reporters gathered outside the headquarters hoping to hear about quarterly earnings and future investments. Instead, Charlotte stood before the cameras with peaceful confidence. She spoke not about markets or competition, but about gratitude, family, compassion, and the quiet strength she had witnessed inside a modest farmhouse far from the city skyline. Across the country, millions watched the interview. Meanwhile, Ethan finished repairing a neighbor's fence before driving home beneath the warm evening sun, completely unaware that his ordinary life had inspired extraordinary change far beyond the rolling fields of Ohio. Sometimes the greatest influence does not belong to the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it belongs to the quiet heart that never realizes the world has been listening all along. Several weeks passed, and the little farmhouse settled naturally into a new season of quiet blessings. Frost appeared across the fields each morning before melting beneath gentle sunlight, while smoke curled peacefully from neighboring chimneys and the old maple tree slowly surrendered its final golden leaves. Ethan continued waking before dawn, loading his weathered toolbox into the pickup truck and driving from one repair job to another with the same steady humility that had always defined his life. Nothing about his character had changed because the world had finally begun to notice him. He still greeted every neighbor with the same warm smile. He still refused to measure success by anything other than returning home in time to share dinner with Lily. Yet something beautiful had quietly changed around him. The kindness he had offered so freely for years had begun returning from unexpected directions. Families he had once helped arrived with homemade pies, fresh vegetables, and handwritten notes thanking him for moments he barely remembered. Mrs. Wilson insisted on planting flowers beside the farmhouse porch. Local volunteers repaired the aging community playground where Lily loved to spend Saturday afternoons. None of it had been requested. Every gesture simply grew from the example one ordinary man had lived without ever asking for recognition. One crisp Saturday morning, another familiar pickup truck rolled into the driveway, just as Ethan finished replacing a section of white fence. Charlotte stepped out wearing blue jeans, a warm wool sweater, sturdy boots, and the same peaceful smile that had first appeared inside the farmhouse kitchen weeks earlier. There were no cameras, no reporters, no executives, and no security vehicles following behind her. She carried only a paper bag filled with fresh bread from a small bakery she had discovered on the drive. Lily ran across the yard with joyful excitement and wrapped her arms around Charlotte before she had taken 3 steps. Charlotte laughed warmly as she embraced the little girl, then looked toward Ethan with quiet gratitude. "I promised I would come back," she said softly. Ethan smiled in the calm way that had always made every visitor feel welcome. This house remembered. Together, they spent the afternoon repairing birdhouses, planting spring flower bulbs for the coming year, and preparing a simple family meal. Charlotte spoke about the foundation that had already begun helping hundreds of working single parents across the country. Ethan listened with sincere pride, but never treated her accomplishments differently from the stories Lily eagerly shared about school projects and new friends. Every conversation carried equal importance around that old wooden table. As evenings settled over the countryside, the 3 of them sat on the front porch wrapped in warm blankets, watching the first stars appear above endless Ohio fields. No one hurried to fill the silence, because peace had become a language they all understood. Charlotte reached in her pocket and gently placed the small silver house-shaped keychain into Ethan's hand. He looked at her with quiet surprise. She smiled through grateful eyes. "I finally know what it means now. A home is never built by money. It is built by the people who choose to care for one another every ordinary day." Ethan carefully closed his hand around the tiny keepsake before looking toward Lily, whose laughter drifted across the yard as she chased glowing fireflies beneath the clear evening sky. He realized that life had not erased the sorrow of the past, nor had it suddenly become perfect. Instead, it had gently woven loss, hope, friendship, compassion, and second chances into something stronger than any dream he could have imagined. Beneath the peaceful stars, surrounded by simple blessings and hearts forever changed, they discovered that the greatest riches are never counted inside bank accounts. They are quietly found in dignity that never demands attention, love that expects nothing in return, and a place where every person is welcomed home.